Good morning and welcome to the March 2024 board meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA, as we prefer to call ourselves. My name is Graham Cook and I'm standing in as interim co-chair of the MHRA alongside Mandy Calvert and Michael Whitehouse. And my role is to lead us through today's agenda. For those who have not attended our board meetings before, I need to start by reminding everybody that this is a board meeting held in public and not a public meeting. It's also important to explain that this board is responsible for agreeing the strategic direction of the agency, maintaining high standards of corporate governance and scrutinising the performance of the MHRA. But it's also important to clarify that this board does not make regulatory decisions on any medicines or medical devices. This is because regulatory decisions on individual medical products are made by ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care on the recommendation of MHRA officials, with the additional independent advice from our expert advisory committees, such as the Commission on Human Medicines. Now, as far as today's meeting is concerned, I need to make you aware that we will be recording the meeting so we can publish the video on our websites to provide the opportunity for as many people as possible to observe what the board does both today and in the future. On that note, I'm pleased that 93 people have registered to observe our meeting live today, with 69 members of the public or representative of patient groups, 13 from industry and 9 members of staff. So thank you all and thank you for joining us. With the introductions in mind, I'd like to go around the room and ask my colleagues on the board to introduce themselves so the audience know who they are, and start with June.
Good morning, I'm June Rain. I'm the CEO at the MHRA.
Good morning, Alicia Ptaszynski-Niefitu, Head of Executive Support, MHRA.
Hi, good morning. Junaid Bajwa, Non-Exec Director, MHRA.
Good morning, Rose Braithwaite, Chief Finance Officer.
Good morning, I'm Liz Booth, I'm Chief People Officer.
Good morning, I'm Alison Cave, Chief Safety Officer, MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Michael Whitehouse, Non-Executive Director and currently one of the interim chairs.
Good morning, I'm Mark Bailey, the Chief Science and Innovation Officer of the MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Glenn Wells, the Chief Partnerships Officer of the MHRA.
Good morning, Claire Harrison, Chief Digital and Technology Officer, MHRA.
Good morning, Paul Goldsmith, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Mercy Jersingham, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Julian Beach, Interim Exec Director for Healthcare Quality and Access.
Good morning, Raj Long, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Mandy Calvert, Non-Exec Director and Interim Co-Chair.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Bosworth, Director of Communications and Engagement.
Good morning, Carly McGurry, Director of Governance, MHRA.
Thank you, everybody. So I think you should have the full board pack for today's meeting, and we'll use the page numbers in that board pack to keep a track on items. And we will assume that people have read those papers so that we can focus on discussion. And I think today, particularly, we've got a very busy agenda, so I think we're going to have to be quite tight on our discussions this morning. And I'd ask for your help with that. So although this isn't a public meeting, we will provide the opportunity for members of the public to ask the board questions about items on the agenda. And when we finished our board discussions, we have time set aside for that. So if you have questions, please do put those in the chat function. However, members of the public who post questions in the chat should be aware that the board cannot see those comments in the chat function, and that will be used by our communications team to provide the questions for us at the end of the session. So if you do want to ask a question not related to today's board papers, please don't use the chat function, but do contact us through the Customer Experience Centre. And similarly, please do not make any personal or abusive comments in the chat function, as you will not get a response and you will be removed from the meeting. We don't tolerate any form of abuse or harassment towards our staff or board members by individual members of the public. That's all my introduction. Anything else anyone would like to add? If not, should we just go through? So in terms of conflicts of interest, I think we've got those in front of us. Is there anything anyone would like to add or update since we last met? If not, oh, Paul.
Yes, I'm no longer a shareholder in Summit, and I've also incorporated a personal services company related to book publishing.
Book publishing, okay, so I don't think that will conflict with today's agenda, but Alice, if you'll capture that, that would be grateful. Great, thank you. Anything else that needs to be flagged? In that case, we've got the minutes of our meeting in public from January in front of us. I don't know if anyone has any comments on those. I think that all the actions there are picked up in the action tracker. I don't think there's anything else we need to do. Any comments? Okay, well, if people are happy, we'll accept that as an accurate record of our last meeting. And then in terms of the action tracker, I think we can look at some of these later in terms of the forward planning for the agenda, but we've got the item on PSEC and patient information leaflets, which are you covering with Alison and Mercy later, or is that?
If we're covering it, we're scheduling it, I think. We've deferred it a little bit on the PSEC agenda, just so that there's more to report, really. But I noted there was a workshop on it in February anyway, so it'll come to us eventually.
Okay, so we can follow up on that. And then we'll hear about the people survey later, I think, from this. Okay, so I think those are the main action items. Anything else that we need to be covering, Carly? No. Great. In that case, let's hand over to June for her review of most important activities.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure colleagues will have, as you said, read the paper. And clearly it has been a very busy start to the year with important progress. The points I'd like to highlight as we work as one agency is our relentless focus on our Return to Green project as we look to regain perhaps some of the lost momentum after COVID and with the transformation changes and return to statutory timeframes for performance. I'd like to highlight how well Regulatory Connect is progressing as we launch by the end of this month Track My Case and Check My Data, so that will help greatly companies follow progress. And our international recognition procedure is now bedding in. I think we heard just this morning how many applications are coming and a split 50-50 with innovative and generic products, something the board has been following. I'd like to highlight the immense variety of science and research undertaken at our science campus. We're used to expecting flu vaccines, for example, coming through, but clearly a grant that funds antimicrobial resistance work is very timely and important alongside our work on diagnostics. And I think the board will have noted quite a few examples where our end-to-end process take something like dementia work, neurodegeneration. We've got everything from the biomarkers through to the products coming through and then the post-marketing surveillance. So a real, if you like, proof that a one agency model is working in practice. Safety is always our first priority. It was really good that our 4 chief medical officers chose to reinforce the need to comply with the valproate safety restrictions, and clearly we're going to be delving into the yellow card system for the genetic clues to adverse reaction susceptibility as an important project with Genomics England. So really I wanted to just highlight our number one, if you like, focus on our efficiency and effectiveness, our new ways of working being embedded in our Regulatory Connect system that replaces our legacy technology, and the commitment of all our staff to working together. And I think while there's a lot of change in the air, what doesn't change is that commitment of all our staff. And I know the board would want to join me in thanking staff for their commitment to keep putting patients first. So just some words of introduction, and really happy to explore some of the items in more detail. I know it's a long report.
No, it is, and always sort of reflecting the breadth of work that's going on, so thank you. Questions or comments on any of these fairly broad range of topics? Michael?
June, excellent report as ever. The one question I've got is really relating to valproate, and I think it's really excellent that the 4 chief medical officers cascaded a letter within the NHS. The question I've got is how effective do we know that is in terms of influencing prescribing practice?
It's a really important question, if I can quickly pick it up, and I'm sure Dr. Alison Cave will want to speak too, that we do have, particularly through our focus on real-world data and other evidence sources, the way to focus on what our risk minimising action should achieve. And our number one is babies being exposed to valproate, where we have a very good understanding of what pregnancy use will risk to that baby's health. Not just physical disability, but about a 40% neurodevelopmental disorder. So we're focusing relentlessly on that. But in terms of the wiser use, not starting people, and that's boys, men, as well as women, will be tracking this too. It has been a slow change over a reasonable period of time. Baroness Cumberledge's review highlighted that. We're hoping that the endorsement by the Chief Medical Officers will really make a difference, as I know some of the communications did during COVID, made a real difference. So, Chair, do you think Alison would like to?
Well, I think,
chip
Mercy,
in
did you want
there?
to come in first and then Alison?
Yeah, thank you.
I can, just with my other hat on as non-executive member of an integrated care board, I also chair Quality, Performance and Oversight Committee, and Valparate and the director from the MHRA came to us, and basically I signed off the action plan for it as well. So certainly at my ICB, and I hope for others as well, that they're closely monitoring this as well.
And I know our previous chair, if I can just chip in, took a similar approach to his integrated care board, 42 leads who could really make a difference if they follow what you have done.
Thanks. I think the only thing I would add is the helpfulness of the letter, because it's across all 4 nations of the UK, so that's a really useful additional communication measure on top of all the other measures which we're doing, which of course we have a drug safety update bulletin, we did a national patient safety alert, we've done media comms, but this is again a really incredibly helpful added emphasis on the need to look at these risk minimisation measures and implement them. And as June said, with the focus of our first phase of measures here of reducing the patients who are starting valproate to those who really have no other effective or tolerated treatment.
Paul, I might just see if you have any comment as our card-carrying neurologist.
I think it's work in progress in terms of how, particularly with sort of addressing the males, gets worked through, because there are knock-on effects in terms of just capacity dealing with the epilepsy services are very overstretched. And I think that's just something we need to be mindful of in terms of the pace of change. So locally, it's prioritisation on the new prescriptions, and then women of childbearing age, and then the males subsequently.
So it'll be a sort of phased approach in some places. Yeah.
I just might chip in, we totally understand the need for resources, and we've been working with the implementation group to really understand how we can best phase these measures and looking at the prioritisation of the measures, focusing on the new prescribers to start with and women of childbearing age.
Okay. Great, I hope that helps, Michael. Other questions? Maybe if I ask one, I was going to ask about IDAP. So I was interested to read about IDAP, and I'm not sure who would, maybe Mark, I don't know. You've got 8 projects prioritised in IDAP, and I was just curious as to the process of how they were selected, because I'd be interested to know the thinking.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yes, we have 8 products out of 81 applicants selected. That selection was done by all of the partner organisations on our IDAP. So as you're aware, that's ourselves, NICE, the devolved administrations, NHS, and we're looking for that truly innovative medical device. So there was that was a significant criteria to understand what was innovative and to address the problem that IDAP's trying to overcome, which is how to expedite these. Often an innovative device struggles through the existing pathways because there's no precedent for it, so you're having to set it in place. So the 8 were selected. We were looking for broad category 8 so that they addressed things like software requirements, AI requirements, different aspects of actually being administered to the patient and so on, and basically trying to capture a representative sample, because the IDAP is at the pilot stage. We're working with these applicants, we're working with the partners to come up with the best service possible.
So it wasn't necessarily just the most important public health need, for example, it's balancing out some of the practicalities of how the system is going to work.
And a patient perspective. I think we should highlight how important it is that patients are involved in these decisions.
Great. Junaid, sorry I didn't see you around my corner.
No problem. I was curious about the meeting we hosted with the FDA and thinking about the global position that the MHRA has moving forward. Was there any key reflections or insights around things that they do particularly well that we could learn from, or things that we do particularly well that they could learn from?
I think it's good to highlight the commonalities of priorities, and there was a clear area around evidence generation, which we'll be taking forward, and also misinformation, where we've got opportunities to work together with the coming respiratory season. A key priority that we share is the global supply chain, and I'm pleased to say that work has already started as a result of that meeting. And I would like, Chair, if you agree, to follow that up, perhaps at a suitable point, because our colleagues put a great effort into making sure that those 2 days were as really productive as possible. And so on evidence generation, on misinformation, on the supply pipeline, and some of the technological advances that we work together on, AI being at the forefront, that we actually have improved momentum because of that, if you like, alignment of thinking.
I might just ask people, some of the senior officers, to comment on areas that were relevant to them that came out, if anything. Alison, and maybe.
Sure, of course. So evidence generation, as June notes, was a key topic. The Commissioner is particularly interested in that. And one of the areas of agreement was to look at how we can work together to best facilitate data sharing in the space of evidence generation. And we agreed that we would look at an international workshop to work on that particular aspect, looking at in the context of a number of use cases across the product life cycle. So I think that was a particularly area of particular sort of agreement.
Okay, got a few hands now. So Claire, Raj.
Yeah, just separate to that, but still in collaboration with FDA, I've had quite a couple of meetings and another one on Friday with my counterparts. So looking at information sharing, knowledge sharing, lessons learned and so on in tech and innovation, not necessarily just AI. There are lots of different opportunities. So looking at how risk averse each agency might be compared to the other and where we have those commonalities so we can share what we've learned already. So that's been really interesting and informative and ongoing, that relationship now.
Great. Raj, you want to come on? Yeah.
June, question around the cell and gene therapy. It's great to see the connection with the
so
Europeans.
Is this on the FDA thing?
No.
Can we just come back? Can we come to?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, come on.
Thank you. In the context of cell and gene therapy, it's great to see the European connection and also the national connection. CBER, the FDA, is very active on this front. They have brought a number of forums working with industry and quite a lot of funding from NIH on that front to them. Might be useful for us if we're not connected to try and reach out and figure out, because if we cover both sides of the pond, then we'll also be in a really good place from an innovation, having access to some of the innovation work that's going on in this area. So just
that's a really wise comment. Clearly, we've got a good interaction on point of care manufacture, which will be key to safe use of some of these really important advances. But I think the head of biologics, CBER, is also in correspondence, particularly around the vaccines. So I think it's wise that we take that dimension as well as the EU. This is moving forward in terms of the point of care, the distributed manufacture through the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, where we've taken the lead in that area, but bringing the FDA along with us.
Rachel, I think June mentioned misinformation. I think that was one of the sort of substantial conversations. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's another area that we know the FDA Commissioner is extremely interested in. So on that, I think it was a very helpful exchange of what each of us were doing in that area. And again, some possibility for some joint working, perhaps around particular topic areas, which we're taking forward.
Yeah, I think the thinking being not related to products necessarily, but just areas that could be communicated better. I mean, is there anything that you think, from your perspective, we should be putting higher up the list?
Well, I mean, I just reflect that during COVID, there was such incredible collaboration globally. And then as a consequence of the COVID pandemic kind of going away in some regards, then everybody's barriers come up again. But this notion of collaboration in a global context, especially I think around areas such as AI, I think are really, really important. And especially when many of these innovations don't actually have any boundaries geographically. How might we be able to collaborate and demonstrate leadership in there would be something for us to consider.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the tone of the meeting from where I sat felt very collaborative, and I think that felt right. But any other comments on that from people? Yeah.
Yeah, I would reflect. I think there was really good collaboration. I think the misinformation was, I think, surprised us a little bit how that was top of the agenda. But when you look at it in terms of how misinformation can actually affect public health quite dramatically. So I think in terms of how we regulate, not necessarily the FDA and MHRA, but how that information is regulated and our role in that is something we haven't got an answer to, but we need to start to think about. And where we've got new technologies such as AI, you know, that could actually put some of this on steroids if we're not careful. So I think it's a really important, difficult problem, but we can only make progress through collaboration.
Raj.
Just to add to that, it was really interesting to see the FDA, the Commissioner's perspective at the night before the meeting when we were discussing misinformation and in all of the rest of it at the dinner. I think one thing that comes across is misinformation is very invasive. We tend to see it in one area or two areas, but actually it's much wider. It ranges from, the impact of misinformation ranges from vaccine hesitancy, not taking medicines and vaccines and products, so vaccine is an example, right through to questioning safety on very specific areas like valproate. So I would like to suggest that we look at it first in a very strategic, big picture perspective, and then target down to what would be the 2 or 3 priorities we want to hit first. Because if I can use the expression, you can't boil the ocean here on misinformation. It won't work, we won't have the resources. But we need to be very specific. And I would like to finish that comment with saying, it doesn't matter how innovative we are and creating all the different regulatory pathways, you know, all of that, manufacturing, accelerating manufacturing, if patients don't want to take the products because they don't trust the system. Yeah. I think that has to be the underlying premise when we're looking at misinformation, is because that's the impact it has, distrust. And 2 areas, I think we need to think when we're communicating science, particularly on safety, it's really important to step back and see who is communicating to who. The messenger is equally important to the content of the message, so that you have the right impact. And that varies quite a bit in different settings. So just some insight into looking at misinformation. Thank you.
Come back on that.
I think what this conversation, this discussion has highlighted is the need for us to put some momentum into this. The idea that we had was we'd share an initiative, particularly around confidence in products available for the respiratory season this autumn. And that gives us a chance to get ready. There will be new products coming through for the first time, RSV vaccine, for example. But I think the whole confidence and uptake of these important public health measures we can enhance if we actually do some collaboration now. So let's come back perhaps through the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee to see what ideas we can bring together.
Okay, something to think about. Other questions, comments? I mean, there was only one other from me, which I think may be for you again, Mark, and if it's not you, then I could take it offline. But I was interested, so I had a conversation this week with Siddharth and Chandran from UK DRI, acronyms I've been told, so the Dementia Research Institute, who's quite excited about the potential of working more closely with MHRA around potential biomarkers. I don't know if you can say anything about what possibilities there could be.
Thank you very much. So there was a visit of MHRA scientists to the UCL dementia biomarkers laboratory, and that's part of us really trying to build up our expertise in this. We're also beginning to see through devices increasing number of companies looking for dementia biomarkers, including one in the IDAP. So to do that, we have to validate effectively what's known about the biomarkers, the ways of sampling it. So I think we're on a significant path, Chair. As we're seeing the new technologies come through, we need to both develop the appropriate reference materials, but also the understanding of how effectively these are clinical markers.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. I'll watch this space. Anything else before we move on? If not, that's great. Thank you, June, as always. I think we're moving on to the finance Finance and HR report for the MHRA. So, Rose, that with you.
Thanks, Graham. So hopefully you've read it all, but I'll just summarise. At the end of January, we had a year-to-date surplus against our income and funding of 11.2 million. We are forecasting this to reduce to 6.6 million by the end of the financial year at the end of this month, so only a couple of weeks away now. This is driven by higher than budgeted income, 2.5 million, so 2% above our budget by the end of January. And although we're forecasting this to reduce, in reality, I don't think it will, as we're clearing more licensing work and therefore recognising more income. Income is artificially low in January, as we've taken out 1.5 million of bank interest, which we've had to return to the Treasury. The surplus is also driven by lower staff costs against our budget, lower operating and project costs year to date. Some of this we are planning to make up in the next couple of months from the January, and early numbers in February are demonstrating that this is happening, but possibly not to the extent that the forecast is anticipating. So I suspect our surplus at the end of the year might well be slightly above 6.6 million. Capital spend is still slightly behind budget year to date, but Regulatory Connect is now spending around 1.3 million a month, so we expect to be on track by the end of the year. We are reallocating minor underspends to make sure we use our capital budget, for instance, replacing equipment that can be bought quite quickly before the end of the financial year. So we will maximise the use of the capital budget that the department has given us. So that's a summary, really, and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Comments, questions? Mandy.
My comment was on the vacancies that we have within the agency, and given some of the challenges we have with performance. I know the vacancies, numerically look about what you'd expect, but do we have any particularly hard to fill roles? And are we missing some key skills? Because sometimes the devil is in the detail. So I'm just trying to match our performance with that vacancy rate.
Like any organisation, of course, we have some roles that are more difficult to fill than others, and our response to this, my response to this, is essentially to change the way we recruit people, spending more of our efforts reaching out to people through LinkedIn and other means, so that we can make sure that we are targeting the right people to fill some of our vacancies. We advertise, as you'll know, on civil service jobs and in other magazines, but many of our staff are not classic civil servants. So our job, I think, in the coming period is to reach out to the people that are likely to be able to help us and want to work for us. And we're spending quite a bit of time deep diving our recruitment procedures, in not just the administrative procedures, but the candidate experience, because I think we've got a lot to do to get to modern standards of candidate experience. Do I think that ultimately there will be jobs that we cannot fill? Potentially a few jobs, especially in the tech area, because of our pay constraints, and that might be an issue for us. But have we done everything that we can to fill the jobs that we've got? Not yet, but we're on it. Hope that helps.
Partly, yes. So I know, I appreciate that. I'm just trying to understand if there are some key skills or key roles we've got missing, which is having quite a big effect on our performance.
I don't believe so. Looking at the jobs that we haven't filled, they're fairly rare, but it might take us several occasions to do that. Looking at what's in the pipeline, we're now monitoring very carefully what's in the sort of pre-pipeline, what's in recruitment, and what's awaiting appointment, if you like, and we've got something like 100 posts coming through. So it's a relentless addition to our workforce.
Okay, well, it would be helpful to know if you think there are areas which are. Yeah, did you want to comment?
If the question had been asked, say, a year ago, we would have been looking at technical medtech particularly, diagnostics, and the leadership in our data strategy. And those, as a priority, have been filled, but there are some others that might not be so much in the spotlight that I think we should perhaps surface at the executive and look harder at. And we might come through talking about some of these later today. I think the main ones are secure, and it's making a big difference.
Claire, did you want to come in on that?
Digital and technology skills and posts are notoriously difficult to fill, but I think we can do more than what we're doing. So I always talk about location, and restricting the geographical locations just to 2 means we just have a really small pool of candidates to choose from, and then really hard to compete because of the civil service organisations, for example, might offer the same sort of packages, and that's before we get to private sector. So we really don't help ourselves in that respect.
And do you think at the moment that's restricting what you can do in terms of the digital transformation?
That's the feedback I get ever since I joined. So we've had informal feedback and formal. I commissioned a third party to look at how we could reach out more. So it was going to people on LinkedIn and so on. Those were sort of tinkering around the edges, but there are some big chunky things that would make a difference.
From a naive point of view, I mean, a positive thing seems to be the reduction in turnover, below average. So at what point below average do we start to worry?
It's a good question. I always like to say for an organisation like this, the sweet spot actually is 8 to 10%. If you fall below 8%, there's a genuine fear of stagnation. So I think we are in the sweet spot. I know we say 10 to 15, but actually for an organisation like this, I'm thinking 8 to 10 would be more.
That was my sense, given where we've been. It felt very positive, so that's good. Raj, did you? Sorry.
Quick question around the corporate sickness absence piece. You've put a statement in there to say that it's notable, but very hard to read into it as to what is the reasons behind it. Is that something we can have a better understanding? Because it's almost threefold higher than some of the other groups. So just curious.
In terms of the corporate group, I can't answer the question how much of that is driven by long-term sickness and how much by short-term sickness. At the moment, we're working through all our long-term sickness cases to really understand them. But I do know anecdotally in the corporate group there are a few significant longer-term sickness cases, and of course it's a relatively small group, so that they will show higher in the figures. But it is a thing that, well, it's something that we are looking at for sure, because it does stick out.
Mercy?
Yeah, my question is really for context. What percentage of our staff are new, let's say within the last year? Because I've kind of lost kind of with the transformation going on. I know we were recruiting quite heavily, and obviously we still have a vacancy rate. But obviously that might affect our turnover, because if people are new, hopefully they will stay with us for a little bit. So that might give me an idea about that.
I'll happily send you the precise figure later, but I'd estimate that it's about 320 to 350 people who are new out of a workforce of 1,300. So it's a significant number, and that's based on the numbers of my recollection of the numbers of people going through recruitment over the past year. So a very significant new tranche of workers.
Yeah, I think we should recognise how much work that's been to regenerate. Michael, yeah.
A comment and then a question. So the issue around recruiting specialist staff, particularly from the science community. June, I was encouraged by the meeting we had with the department last week, where they seemed very supportive and were looking for information that we could provide where we may be disadvantaged because we can't offer the salaries that market would expect. And I would encourage the agency to think about that very carefully, because it's okay where we are today, but where might we be in year 1, year 2 or year 3? So I'm very interested in the longer term recruitment strategy and retention, and we need to think about that. My question really for Rose is, you in your paper you ask, are there any advice or lessons that we could see as a board in terms of the financial position? I know, not unlike most public sector organisations, there's a bit of a rush to spend the money in the last 3 months of the year, and that's been going on for generations. I just wondered whether we are in a position now, in terms of our maturity, to be able to, with the big ticket items, are we now able to project more accurately likely spend? So if you take Regulatory Connect, which is not mature, but we've got a clear project plan. We know where we're going. Have you got a good idea about what you expect the monthly spend on Regulatory Connect? And are you getting that information from the team, the project team?
Thanks. Yeah, a very good question. Yes and no, if that makes sense. So the stages of Regulatory Connect. So we have a good view of the final costs for the first phase. Yeah. The second phase is still in development, so we have the requirements, but they haven't necessarily been translated into the technical delivery and therefore the cost. So we see we investigate the forecast every single month at the board. So the data is good, but it does change. As with all major projects, it does change. So I can see that the team are very much on top of trying to understand that forecast and what it will look like. And I think we've got a very good view of what it will cost next year. But we know that is liable to change during the year as we finesse the delivery of each stage of the project.
Okay. My only response to that is, given where we are in terms of public finances, everybody in the organisation needs to recognise that if you don't spend the money within the financial year, you lose it.
Yes.
And it's going to be increasingly more difficult, I think, to secure funds from the Treasury. And this is a key management skill that I think needs to be fully embedded within the organisation. And it stems from chief officers all the way down.
But Rose, sorry, I mean, I got the sense from things we'll discuss later that you are thinking differently for next year. So I don't know how much you want to say about that.
Yes, so we are going to introduce, with the board's approval, the concept of running hot next year. Because year on year, apart from when we did make a concerted effort to spend our reserves in the last year as a trading fund, we have underspent against our income and as a result not been able to use the money. So for next year we are proposing actually allocating more budget than we have expect to come in terms of income, with the expectation that again this will happen, and therefore we will drop back during the year and land more precisely on the money that we have come in from income and from the department. So that's our proposal to make sure this doesn't happen again, Michael. We will obviously be monitoring that incredibly closely, because one of the things we cannot do is overspend and make a loss. So we will be stepping up on our forecasting and our monitoring, particularly towards the end of the first quarter, when all of our assumptions that we've had to put in we'll know more about.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments?
Just wanted to pick up that little bit. And how much, because I know there's sometimes an issue about when we get grants in and then gearing up to deliver on it. Is that a big issue? How does that kind of fit into the planning process? Because I know we put applications in early, but we don't always hear within the financial year.
It has traditionally been an issue, because also we don't learn for certain our funding from the department until around the 31st of March. So you've almost got a delay. But one of the things that I have been saying to everyone across the business is, and we just have to keep approving things with the expectation that our funding next year and our grants will be what we expect them to be. Because that's one of the issues, that there tends to be a hiccup in April, May, because we've paused to wait until we know for certain we're getting funding. And that's one of the things I've been trying to stop, because we can be 80%, 90% certain we'll get these grants and funding, and we can rein things back if we don't. It's far better to get going, because otherwise we do have that same pattern of slow spend in the first quarter because we haven't been certain we'll get the money, and then having to catch up in the second half of the year. So we're trying to preempt that this year. Let's see what our success rate is at the end of the first quarter.
Good. We'll have more discussion about that, I think, at some point. Great. I mean, I've only ever had a banking error in my favour in Monopoly, but do you want to explain about the interest, and what do we need to learn anything from that?
No, this is a hangover from us ceasing to be a trading fund, unfortunately. So as a trading fund, we were allowed to keep the interest on our bank accounts. As an agency, that interest belongs to the Treasury. So in the first half of the last year, which was our first year as an agency, we welcomed the increase in interest rates and generated quite a bit of income on our bank accounts. Unfortunately, we now need to pay that back because it's not ours. So,
shame. Oh, great. Okay, thanks, Rose. That's very clear. Let's move on. Thank you. The next I think we're looking at is established medicine. So clearly this is an area that the board's been quite focused on recently. We know that the performance here is not as good as we would like it to be, but Julian, do you want to update us on progress?
Sure. Just really trying to provide a bit of a status update for where we are up until the end of February and into March now. We have made significant progress in terms of the first 2 months of the year in clearing a number of applications through. Changes to process, changes to resource have resulted in a significantly increased work output rate, so that we have cleared 344 applications from the work queue up until the end of February, and that was 234 from within the backlog and 110 which were in-date applications. So a real step change, and you can see from the graphs later on in the paper of the sort of step change in the trajectories that we're now looking at. We are continuing to sustain that performance, and in some cases better that performance during March. During January, we launched one change of process regarding our targeting of assessments and the assessment reports generated. And then on the 1st of March, we launched a subsequent change where we are working with industry to look at a streamlined review cycle, and which should impact as we go forward through the year. We're seeing positive engagement with that as we go forward. So as you can see, the numbers in backlog are listed in the paper. I won't go into too many more details, but extensive industry engagement has been happening over the quarter and continues to happen. We do have further focus on how do we continue to work with both the process of the assessment, so looking at evolving into some of the other more segmented parts of the CTD module which is submitted to us, and we're also looking at how can we increase still further the external supply of labour into the established medicines, and that is a continuous focus, so with a work stream led by human resources. So that is something which is bringing fruit. It could be quicker than it is, but it is something that we are working very much on. I would just like to draw out a section on culture, in that people are very much working with extreme focus and extreme dedication on this, and I really want to thank everybody within the assessment teams and across the agency for the help and support that they are putting into clearing this, and it is causing a lot of heartache and dedication to get this progress moving forward. There has been a real step change in morale. People are feeling engaged with the positive momentum that we are seeing in the new year as well, and that's something that we are actively working on, encouraging and seeing how we can develop. And we do have an ambitious target to meet for the end of March to ensure that we are continuing to demonstrate our ongoing performance and commitment to this. We are obviously monitoring, as we've also, the questions have previously in board this morning, regarding the KPIs in staff turnover, and we're noting that within established medicines area particularly, and we're looking at how can we increase care and support to those employees at the same time, because we want to make sure that we have the right support. We are then obviously looking at the future sustainability. We're building on where we are with the current throughput, so I have put in 7.2. The group of people that we're talking about are working on a broad suite of activities within the licensing area. So it's how do we build a sustainable model for all of those going forward. So we have that in development at the moment. We did make some reference to it in January board, but we want to have a bit more time to make sure that that is really robustly developed so that we have a clear model, especially with the new processes that we are and will continue to do for the next period of time. So I don't know if there's any particular questions that people would like to ask, but more than happy.
Thanks. No, it's very clear. Questions? Paul.
No, it's very good to see the sort of lines going in the right direction. Thank you. In terms of the various tools that you're using, such as extra resource, process redesign, what is the balance between those? Because I'm just thinking when the extra resource is removed, do we lose 90% of the uplift in throughput or 30%?
So quite a big proportion of that has come through the process change up until this point, so that we have a smaller proportion. So if you were to arbitrarily split it, 80-20 rule would seem sensible, 80% through process change, 20% through resource. So we're looking very much as to how do we make sure this is sustainable going forward. And equally, the resource capability, given also the comments we had about we have a lot of new staff, that is very evident in this area, so that in the pharmaceutical quality assessment area, we have approximately 50% newish staff, and that's something that they are growing in their capability as every day goes past, so that those parts will be able in the longer term to be coped with, but we are also looking to make sure that it is right sized.
That's fantastic. That's really impressive if it's 80% and it's something that one would hope would be spread across the whole agency.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about this this culture shift. Obviously, as staff find that they're becoming more productive in this new way of working, that's increasing morale, as you say. What do you think may be the sticking points? I mean, really trying to put enough support around people with actually a leadership that's quite stretched themselves too. What do you think might be the sticking points? Because we want this momentum to keep going, really. And I'm just thinking about the lessons we might learn, especially for other areas.
Sure. I mean, I think it's trying to be as open as we can be and as transparent with both our own staff, but also with companies, so that we are reducing the requests that are coming in, that continual same trajectory of what the work they will be picking up, to try and give that sense of knowledge about what they will be doing. The support, we equally need to be doing that for our line managers as well as the people doing other assessment roles. But it is about giving that common frame, giving that openness, giving that, so that we have weekly briefings, of which I participate in, so that people can ask questions and be very clear with what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so it's having that, but I don't think you can underestimate just the positive numbers, what that does for morale as well, when you can see that you are making, because when we look through 2023, we were making progress but not significant enough, and then it doesn't generate a real positive momentum. But over the last 3 months, that we are seeing that momentum and people are picking up on that.
And I was also struck by the culture piece, but can you remind me, as an organisation, what we do to sort of what mechanisms we have to celebrate things when they are going well? I'm not saying this is there yet, but in general terms.
Yeah, so there are a number of things, but I mean, Liz might wish to comment as well. But for me, it is simply about saying thank you and making sure that people are aware of what contributions they have. there are reward mechanisms within the frameworks of pay and other things that we do utilise and have utilised in this area, but it's looking to make sure that we have that sense of saying thank you, really.
Just to add to that, there are of course reward mechanisms that Julian's touched on, but in my view, it's completely right to say it's recognition that matters, and we do have some sort of recognition methods. So, in particular, a small voucher and a nice letter from June is hugely valued in our organisation, such that people tell you what they've spent their voucher on. It's very, very nice. But I'd also add that. On the culture piece, the compassionate leadership from my colleagues in HQA, as they've inspired their colleagues to change the way they work, that sense of compassionate leadership and being open and listening to people is the key. And Julian would be much too modest to say it, but I do think that compassionate leadership comes from the senior leaders in that in that bit of the organisation too, and it's a commendable thing. We are putting people though under tremendous pressure, and that cannot be an indefinite thing. So I'd ask the board to balance those things, and people are glad to do it because they want the organisation to be incredibly successful. But we must put in place the mechanisms that enable us to continue to sustain that performance, and we can't put people under the kind of pressure they're under indefinitely, for sure.
And I think we would all echo that. I think acknowledging progress, but as we will touch on a number of conversations, it's about the longer term fixes that make this sustainable and enjoyable. I don't know if that's what you're going to say. There's lots of hands. I don't know what order, but maybe Raj.
Thanks, Graham. I also want to commend on the trajectory here. Julian, in terms of how well it's, it's a lot of hard work has gone, and a thank you on behalf of the board to all of the team for getting us there. One suggestion in terms of the outline of the reports, what is not visible or evident in the write-up of the report is there a mechanism, and I'm sure you have one, but it'd be good to see the evidence of that in here, particularly in the area of established medicines. Not all medicines are equal, because if you look at it at a class level, there are sometimes multiple options for certain indications in a class, and in other areas they're much narrower. It'll be good to see in our backlog clearance plan how that is thought through, because the right thing to do would be to prioritize those that have, in quotes, a greater medical need. So in other words, fewer manufacturers provide the pipeline, the supply chain. Yeah. So some sort of prioritization against availability. So I call it medical need, but really around availability.
I think there is an aspect of that. So do you want to?
It's not evident in the report. It'd be good to see that. I'm sure you're doing that, but it'd be good to see that. Thank you.
Sure. So we have made that kind of quite clear in terms of how we are prioritising that, so that we have in those external engagements that to trade associations and to others which have been recorded and are available on our website to view if people would like to see that. But those prioritisations really go about public health, making sure that the requirements, and that is for both shortage medicines as well as for those which are first generics, those are given the highest priority. We work very closely with Department of Health's medicine supply teams to ensure that we are achieving and making sure that the backlog does not impact any of those aspects, so that very clearly we've got, as you saw, 344 licenses granted, 110 of them were within date applications because of our commitment to make sure that we do not affect those prioritizations. So I can absolutely put it in for a subsequent update, but it's very clear and public about how we are prioritizing and what we're delivering on that.
Thanks. Thank you for that. But it'd be good to see for the board to see how that's being done, because we're not going into the public website to inform ourselves. So just wondering, if you put it all in one place, then we're able to answer the questions you're asking the board. To come back just for the future reference. Thank you.
Mandy.
Thanks, Graham. Again, I'll just echo good progress, and I think we're seeing that transparency of working that, and very encouraging to see looking at multiple factors to take us forward. I'm just coming back to 1.6. It's clear that progress has been made, but further acceleration is required. And you've hinted at there's some things that will enable that acceleration, like assessors being more qualified and capable. What are the key things that are going to are required to accelerate to clear the backlog by September?
Okay, so to do that is to maintain the recruitment plan that we have for additional resources. So that is critical to that, in which we're working together with HR to make sure that that is delivered, so that we have got contracts being signed at the moment to enable that increase in resource to be delivered. We're also looking at how do we enhance further our changes to any processes that we have. Also looking at reprioritization of work within the agency so that we can deliver more specialisms to the established medicines pipeline without compromising other areas of the agency. So that's really something that we're making sure that we are looking at. So things around, if there are, for example, in our business plan, we're looking at the priority of that to ensure that we are, with our Return to Green program, making sure that we're focusing on those things which are very critical to deliver these aspects. But what we're looking at is making sure that both the process is further evolved and the people are recruited.
Okay, I think it will be quite useful just to see, to make sure they're on track, to make sure you've got that support, and then perhaps understanding how Regulatory Connect is also contributing in the processes too.
I think it's really the most important question the board has to consider, how to accelerate. And of the three main things we can do, one, we've talked about resource, and that needs to be very rigorously monitored with clear targets performance-wise, and I'm assured that's happening. The second is the use of reliance and recognition, and this is where companies need signposting. So we're going to have to put a bit of resource into helping any applicant who's got quite challenging and quite important choices for them, and we need to understand how companies make these decisions. So if we're going to move up the recognition pathway, where other stringent regulators have really done a rigorous assessment, we don't duplicate that and we build on that. And the third one that you've talked about quite a lot is the targeted process. This is where Regulatory Connect can be used to make sure that people don't, if you like, pursue an issue that maybe can be decided. So I think we'll use those, but building on Mandy's point, we need to be actually quite relentless in the way we monitor those and get the metrics visible so all can see, because that's the only way with a longer term project than clinical trials that we do deliver by September, and that needs a real drumbeat of those three interventions.
Do you want to comment or no? I mean, I think it's great to see the way, and I thank you for the paper. I think it's very clear and for your leadership on this. I think there's a little bit here for me which is still missing, which is really just seeing the forward trajectories. I think you've talked about the low complexity stuff, and that seems to be on track, if I understand, to be cleared, the backlog to be cleared quite soon. I'm not quite clear, based on this, when the more complex backlog is predicted to be cleared and how we track that. And I think we've talked about this before, and I think, Rose, we were looking for feedback to you for the sort of card as to what metrics would look like. I don't know if you got any feedback after the last board meeting, but this may be something that we can feed in. But does that seem reasonable? I think that you've talked about it before, but I don't see it here, and it's just helpful to know.
We can share that. We do have a trajectory model in terms of how we're clearing that, and we can have.
I think for us, and I think probably for stakeholders, that's going to be helpful just to see that. And I think everything you're doing is great.
We can share that.
Any final comments? Otherwise, no. Lovely. All right. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for the progress. Oh, sorry.
Julian, I really support all that you're doing. I mean, just bringing together other people's comments. What I'd welcome, and it's for you to determine when, it's really what is the operating model now for delivering sustained performance in dealing with market authorisations, and it's just some visual representation of you know, the process design has been redone and this is how it operates. This is the proportion that might be subcontracted if that's the option. This is the core establishment that you need in terms of people to take forward. Now, I think if the board could see that and be confident that that could deliver sustained performance, you know, we just let the organisation get on and deliver it. But it plays to Liz's point. I think if you have that vision and that vision is clear, it means people can see the end of the light of the tunnel. And your paper is brilliant. It shows all the work that's been doing. But for me, it's dealing with the symptom rather than what is the long-term solution. I hope that makes sense. But
yeah, I think that does bring together a few threads. But yeah,
no, and I totally agree with that, and I acknowledge that in terms of that's where in the paper. I really wanted to say that over the next 2 months that we will bring that together, and that is very much front and centre. I can't remember what section, but towards the back end of the paper, I did mention that. And part of the reason why we're taking a bit of time with this is because we are changing quite a lot of the processes right now, and we need to accurately budget, we need to accurately forecast how we then pull that together to be the long-term sustainable model. But
I was just going to add one other thing. I know Carly's leading the work on, you know, how do we introduce within the organisation almost like a total quality management system, which you'll know from your industry experience, how that's going to fit, because that will be, I think, will contribute to the quality cultural change, and B, will provide the board with the evidence it needs that this system is working effectively.
Yeah.
I know it's a long way off yet.
No, I mean, but I think that you're absolutely right in terms of they go hand in glove in terms of the quality system, and Carly and I are very much working together on how can we do that. But again, it comes back to that presenting something which is real and then being very clear on what that is, and that's really kind of in development right now, because the changes we're putting in place for the last one, which is from 1st of March, which is only 18 days ago. So it's really making sure that we have that clarity so that it is a real model about how do we look at it. Because there are other things I would believe that in addition to the trajectory, but also what pathways and how do we triage, I think it was to Raj's question about prioritisation, how do we then bring those medicines to the NHS that it needs?
I think that's something that would be useful to report on. And if the answer's none, that's fantastic. But I think we need to know if that's an issue.
As a consequence, no, but could be aided by yes, so that we can, because market supply changes monthly, daily, so that's something that we look to try to bring out so that we can provide that, and we track that.
Great. All right, thank you. And thank you for the paper. So I think we'll move on at this point. Shall we move on to clinical trials, which I guess is a similar conversation but slightly more progressed? So, Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we might be being joined by James Pound, who's as well.
Should we just give it a moment then?
But, if I can just introduce the paper. So we have, as you say, more progressed. So we cleared the backlog on clinical trials last year and put in place a new operating model. And that operating model was designed to make sure that it is a sustainable delivery and we don't run into the problems we've seen before. Now, that operating model reviews a quite comprehensive review of the processes we've used, bringing in new processes, adapting existing processes. And I'd just like to take at this point a huge thank you. During this time, we've been supported by assessors from other parts of the organisation. They've done a fantastic job in supporting us, and I'd just like to say publicly thank them for all the work they've done, but they're returning now back to their bases at the end of March. And so this paper is a chance to look to see how the operating model is proceeding, and also to look ahead to the new legislation and new guidance. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And just welcome, James. You might want to introduce yourself for the audience, and then perhaps if you want to just highlight the features of the paper you'd like to focus on.
Sure, thank you. So, good morning. I'm James Pound, Deputy Director for Standards and Compliance within Healthcare Quality and Access, and I've been supporting Mark and the clinical trials team since July of last year with improving performance and developing the new operating model. So the paper gives an update on performance, and you'll see that in section 3. What you'll see is performance remains good. We did have 4 exceptions that occurred during January, but that was very much driven by the administrative errors that occurred. The assessment had actually all been undertaken by the assessors, so that wasn't the bottleneck here. And some of that relates to how much faster we are now and how much improved we are with our assessment. And you need to make sure that some of those processes that run in the back of the machine, so to speak, in the future potentially end up automated rather than relying on a lot of manual intervention. And you will have seen earlier this week, or the end of last week, we published the February data, and again, that remains within SLAs, so above 98% for both initials and amendments. So I think we can say that we've got consistent good performance across assessment, and you can see in figure 2, the table shows the averages since September of last year. So certainly between September to December, 100%, and then you're looking around 98% across January and February. Then going forward, as Mark referenced in the opening, the intention is that for the small number of residual redeployed assessors returned to the home areas of the agency at the end of March, and we discontinue some of the external support, we have put together very careful planning around managing that change, that step change as we go through, and there has been additional recruitment and training and changes to processes. We've got very careful performance management now, so we'll have early warning of any issues, and we do have contingencies we can implement, including the prioritisation of our work to maintain performance in that area. That then moves us to where we are with developing the new operating model. So members will recall that we presented that operating model at the January meeting, and in terms of updates, we've been working to expand the criteria for the use of notification. So this is for both the initial clinical trial application and the amendments. We've held a couple of workshops, and those proposals will be going to the April meeting of the Commission for Human Medicines for their advice and consideration. And we've been working closely with partnerships and the legal team to make sure that the future regulations are drafted and designed to incorporate the use of notification for both the initial applications and subsequent amendments. Clinical trials lifecycle package, and we're working to establish a follow-up workshop for that proposal. So you'll recall that's where we're looking to establish support across the different phases of the trial. So rather than seeing them as discrete entities, how we take a lifecycle approach for that. At the January meeting, there were a number of questions around the detail around the capacity model that we're supporting the new operating model. So section 6 talks through this, very much based on productivity data that we've established over the last 6 months, on the demand data that we can forecast for the future, modelling the impact of the change of the notification scheme and the process changes we've implemented. And you'll see that it outlines the posts that are set out for assessment, operational support, and then regulatory compliance, many of which we've already filled. So, for example, for the clinical assessor post, that number will be reached before June of this year. So those numbers are already increasing, and onboarding and the training to support those new members of staff. You'll also see that there's a note under 6.16 which talks around the update on the drafting of the new legislation. So that's making good progress with a view to laying in Parliament later this year, and the annex to the paper sets out the timelines that's associated with that. What will follow on in the next stage in the coming months will be the development of comprehensive guidance to support and underpin the new regulations. That's something we've committed to co-create where appropriate with our stakeholders, and we've allocated additional resource to be ring-fenced to support the development of that guidance in the coming months. The work on the fees and cost model continues, so you'll be aware of the project that Finance are running to determine our future fees, and that will conclude the data collection period this month, and that will inform the future developments around fees around clinical trials. Digital infrastructure, we've had some short-term improvements that are coming through in terms of reporting, but also the completion of some initial alpha phase discovery work around what we might want the future IT infrastructure to support, and you'll see a number of possibilities outlined in the paper. Obviously, there will be a staggered approach as we bring in the new operating model, both to the regulations but also to future changes. We want to be careful, one, not to overwhelm our own capacity, but also two, to ensure institutional readiness in the wider sector so that we provide sufficient support that they can align with the new regulations. And then you'll see the final section referring to communications and stakeholder engagement. So a comprehensive plan in place from our communications colleagues. So that includes working with wider government on the GREAT campaign to promote the UK as a destination for clinical trials internationally, continuing to keep our stakeholders updated through meetings with the trade associations, but also through the publication of performance data, as well as the ongoing customer support through the helplines and other measures established during the response of last year. We also attended the MHRA FDA Health Canada tripartite good clinical practice and pharmacovigilance symposia in Washington, DC in February of this year, and we took that opportunity to meet with stakeholders in the clinical research community in the US to also reassure them on MHRA's continued robust performance for assessment of clinical trials. So the board is asked to consider 2 points, one in relation to the ongoing sustainability of our assessment performance, and the second regarding the assurance from the update on the implementation and development of the new operating model. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks. So, I mean, it's really great to see the breadth of what's been done and required for this issue. But comments, questions from the board? Oh, sorry. We are in my blind spot, so you just have to wave.
The blind spot is asking. So maybe a question, but also maybe a question to Julian too. I just wondered, what's the feedback we've had from industry on both aspects? Are we meeting expectations? Are they asking for more? What's the general consensus on our reputation with industry as it stands?
So for clinical trials, I think from the meetings we've had with trade associations,
I don't think your mic's on, can you?
And with individual companies, we have had positive feedback on our performance, and they are closely monitoring the data that we're publishing. I think it would be fair to say that they want to see their continued performance before it reaches the same level of reputation that MHRA had prior to some of those delivery challenges. So I think it's a good story, but one we have to continue to deliver on if we really want to underpin that ambition from obviously our own operating model, but those of the government's life sciences vision and others around drawing clinical research to the UK.
Yeah, and I think the good thing is we've got very transparent metrics that we can look at, and that's going to really help with that. Other comments, questions? Maybe if I ask one. So there's, sorry. Yeah.
I was wondering if Julie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to comment. I mean, for us, for the established medicines piece, I think it's slightly behind clinical trials in terms of very much it's welcome the openness of what we're doing and the fact that we are making progress. But I think it's really making sure that we get to the end of it, which is critical, which is getting to that point where clinical trials is now, and that's something which we're focused on.
Commenting really from the meetings of the trade associations that we have routinely. And I would echo both what James and Julian have said. I think clinical trials seem to be turning a corner, but there's still the jury's out a little bit. I think there's great understanding of the challenges in established medicines, and we still have support. And the important thing is to continue to build that trust and confidence. And I think that's, as Julian said, some of the work there. So that is really important. They're obviously they want things to be better, but there is an understanding, and I think the collaboration is, the communication and explaining what's going on is valued.
Yeah, that's reassuring. Rose, do you want?
Yes, thanks for the paper. I've just got a question on your operating model and how you've set that, because you've got very new members to your team who are still developing their skill sets. You've got new processes, improvements in the casework system, so lots of change going on. So I just wondered how you've set the proposed structure for your operating model to take all of that into account and right-size the team, because it's quite a difficult point in time to right-size it, isn't it?
Yeah, sure, and it's a fundamentally kind of critical part to the new operating model. So what Section 6, which refers to the kind of capacity planning part, talks around is very much looking at our demand forecasting. So one, understand what's coming into the assessment machine, let's say, but also where we want to increase our ability to provide scientific advice upstream. But then looking at our actual real-world data in terms of our productivity, so what we're able to achieve. And that also reflects what we can achieve with a mixed model of experience within the team already. So we do still have a number of very experienced assessors, and they're supporting the mentoring and training of the new assessors who are bringing on board. We learnt a lot from our response over the summer about how in some cases we can really accelerate and augment some of our traditional training programs to really bring people up to speed much more quickly. And the capacity data which sits behind it also has a degree of a resilience factor built into it so that it can flex to accommodate those training needs, but also if there's increased demand. And then you've got the additional recruitment, which we've completed at pace, which means by June, all those additional posts are in place and able to be performing. And actually what I would expect to see is as we finalise the criteria for notification, which we can implement within our existing framework, but also build into the new regulations, we will open up additional capacity. And that's where we want to refocus that capacity towards the life cycle package work, the upstream scientific advice. And to connect that to the previous point around reputation, one of the really strong pieces of feedback we had whenever we meet with stakeholders is obviously they value our operational performance, but the ability to engage with us prior to a submission is, it's really the Rolls Royce that they look for from us as a regulator. That's the part that truly makes us enabling to clinical research. So opening up that capacity will be critical, and that's again built into that model and how we've designed the FTEs to support it.
I'm glad you've raised the upstream question because it is key to a new model and will really, as you've just said, James, attract people to the UK. It's something that the FDA seems to do quite well. And my first question was, have you been liaising with the FDA on how that could work? Secondly, if we look at the ILAP model, upstream advice from the regulator, scientific clinical trials expertise is fine, but people will want HRA and NIHR as well in the concept of ILAP that you bring everybody together for, if you like, 360-degree enhanced first advice about navigating what is actually a complex pathway. Has that been further explored? And if not, would you have a plan to?
So certainly, if I perhaps tackle the international element first, the domestic element. So certainly we worked very closely with our peer regulators. When we were in the US in February, we met with US FDA leadership around clinical trials. We've discussed where there are future opportunities for collaboration. That's at a bilateral level, but also we have through international fora such as ICMA, so the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, where we have the opportunity to set more strategic direction globally around clinical trials. And there is, for example, a reflection paper on the use of platform trials that's currently going through publication with ICMA that the MHRA participated in along with other regulators, but also with the Access Consortia. So there's Australia, Canada, Switzerland, Singapore and the United Kingdom. Huge opportunities there potentially for us to work very closely with those peer regulators, not only where we can collaborate on assessment, but as you very clearly point out, how we can collaborate on the upstream scientific advice, in particular where you have multinational clinical trials that may be operating across those domains and the opportunities to work together on that. Domestically, we work incredibly closely with HRA on combined review, but also with NIHR, not least of which during our resolution of operational challenges over the summer, where NIHR played an important role in supporting us through that process. I think there is more we can do in that space to bring together the collaboration on those different parts of the system to support the upstream engagement advice. And I think ILAP and the clinical trials lifecycle package that we set out in the operating model are the tools that I think we need to do that. And I think there's certainly a very receptive welcome when we've raised those topics with our partners in the system.
Okay, briefly. So I think Raj first, then Mark, and then.
Thank you. Just building on June's question, is there an opportunity? Because one of the things that tends to fall through the crack, at least from the feedback I've had, is when they come to the MHRA for clinical trials. To your point, June, having NIHR and also HRA there is very helpful. Is there an opportunity here for the agency to actually be the lead coordinator? Could we come up with a process whereby, where the agency is the go-to person, and then you use your collaborations and MOUs internally? That would be hugely beneficial for industry, because then they're not having to go and ask different people, to want to do that. And I think it's a really nice role as well, if feasible, to take on, because then you actually have one more piece you can add to it later downstream. That will be the collaboration with NICE. You know, you can almost bridge it in a continuum from an end to end. So if at all possible and the agency can do that role, I'm sure industry will hugely benefit from it.
Do you want to comment, and then Mark may?
I'm sure that's a really good steer. And the current status with HRA re-establishing their IT and digital infrastructure opens the door for our clinical trials to be equally application interface developed, and NIHR too. So I think we'll take that as an action point.
Mark, last comment maybe?
Just building on particularly the link with the HRA, we have the combined ways of working. That's an O'Shaughnessy deliverable. I'm very pleased to say that the team is easily meeting the 60-day target, averaging around about 44 to 46 days a month. So we've got a very strong embedded relationship with the HRA, which I'm sure we can now expand to make sure that the advice is coordinated.
Okay, thanks. Just before we move on, there's just a couple of things I just wanted to clarify. So the first thing is, in terms of the low-risk pathway that exists now, is there a plan built in or plan to assess how that's performed, just to sort of assure us that that's working well?
Sure. So I think by this you're referring to the notification scheme we brought in for low-risk clinical trials. So this is predominantly for trials in phase 4, but also some trials in phase 3.
Yeah.
So we're keeping that under continuous review, and I referred to us taking expanded criteria to the Commission for Human Medicines in April. That will incorporate that retrospective review of how that's operated since October, and where we want to take in the future. I think one of the learnings we have to date is we have to improve how we communicate and explain new processes. I think there is still a degree of clarification that's required for users, and I think for the institutional readiness work that we'll build in for the new operating model and the new regs, we're already taking that learning into account, that we really have to build in a lot of work with stakeholders to help them understand these new processes and simplify them as much as possible.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, when you think it's right, but it would be useful to sort of be assured about that at some point when you've got that review. And final thing just from me was, I mean, I think clearly you talked a little bit about the surge capacity, if you like, that you took advantage of last year. And as you move into this new phase, do you have a contingency where you could dial that up quickly if things were needed? Is that part of your planning?
So the new model does allow a factor for surge, so it creates a kind of resilience to the model. But actually what I think is really important is a focus on us improving our forecasting. So I know Julian and colleagues in HQA have done a lot of work to try and improve our forecasting around volumes of marketing authorisations or variations the agency can anticipate. And certainly discussions we've started to have with industry has been around understanding the likely volumes that will come in. That will better enable us to right-size our capacity and capability. And to add to that, not just volume, but the types of applications, the complexity of them, the modalities that are being explored, all those elements helping us to better ensure that we're able to provide the service they need. So it is something we're aware of, and I think it's both having the capacity but also that accurate forecasting of demand really critical.
Great. Okay, I think we'll draw a line there, but thank you for that. It's very clear, and thank you to you and your team for all the work that's gone into that, because it's clearly, compared to where we were last August, it's a very different state of affairs. Great. I think, Alison, you're up next and going to update us on the Yellow Card Biobank.
Yes. Thanks very much, Chair. So for those online, the aim of the Yellow Card Biobank is to better understand how a patient's genetic makeup can impact the safety of their medicines and more specifically the incidence of side effects to those medicines. And we feel that understanding the underlying mechanism of adverse reaction would support the development of new testing, pharmacogenomic testing strategies to reduce the burden of public health burden of ADRs and also, of course, the personal burden on an individual. So that's the vision of the biobank. We have a 2-year pilot, which we launched last year, and we're now at the midpoint of that pilot. So during the first year, as the paper sets out, we've established and recruited an excellent team. We've established a formal memorandum of understanding with Genomics England, our partner in this pilot, a formal governance structure, including a steering board, a scientific advisory board, a project board, and a patient and public involvement advisory group. We've finalised a procurement contract for the blood collection, and we've launched 2 pilot topics. One is allopurinol and Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which is a very severe skin reaction. And the second is DOACs, which is direct-acting oral anticoagulants, and severe bleeding. Those two topics have been carefully chosen to answer different questions through this pilot. The first, allopurinol and SGS, has a known variant already identified, and what we want to look at is, can the biobank identify this variant and potentially look at other variants which might influence this reaction? And the second, the DOACs, direct-acting oral anticoagulants and severe bleeding, less certainty whether there's a genomic variant underlying that, but what we're looking at is, through the biobank and a more discovery phase project, can we identify a variant which may increase the risk of this particular adverse reaction? So I'm happy to take any questions on that. That's really where we are. We're continuing to support the pilots with communication activities, both through the general media, with the support of our comms colleagues, but also just the other week we had a very successful healthcare professional engagement workshop. 78 attendees registered, 31 attended, strong coverage across devolved nations, and that was specifically focused on the DOAC pilot. We had consultants, nurses, pharmacists, the yellow card centres supported it, and really very positive conversations overall around how could they engage with the pilot and how would they best, how would we best contact them and ensure that their patients could be offered an opportunity to participate. And just finally, so we've currently launched the patient participation, the recruitment, through the yellow card systems. We recruited 5 patients already, and another one is awaiting sign-off. We also started this week through CPRD, contacting patients who have been identified as potential candidates through the CPRD system. And we're waiting for just the final ethics approvals on healthcare professional documents to be finalised. So happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Questions, Mercy?
Well, a couple of comments and a question. Just this is such a great area, really, around patient safety. So it's an area I'm really excited about, and so it's great that we're kind of making progress and getting people on trials and stuff. Just to comment that the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee did look at the process of how consent was given by people. So we looked at the material and we looked at all the work that went in before this was kind of rolled out, about kind of the engagement work on developing those materials as well with patients and public input. So that's really important to say that it comes from a really good base of that. And my question, I've got around to it eventually, is are we, how many regulators in the world are doing this? So that, is this pioneering? Are we learning from others? That would be great to know.
I think it is actually the only biobank on pharmacogenomics directly led by the regulator and directly involved. I know there is a Swedish biobank which has a similar vision, but not quite the same engagement. Of course, there are other research projects globally looking to investigate pharmacogenomics, but I think the excitement here is that you can really leverage what is a really fantastic resource of adverse drug reactions reported to us over many, many years to recruit people. And I think that is what is exciting about the project, leveraging our yellow card scheme. And what we found with our initial engagement is that patients are really keen to engage with this particular initiative. So that's been really, really reassuring and encouraging.
Yeah, and also leveraging the ecosystem where you've got Genomics England that are really leading a lot of things. Raj?
Absolutely.
I have to say, Alison, this is the most exciting element of safety that I'm hearing, because one of my questions was around also what Mercy raised, other regulators. as I'm connected with a few other regulators internationally on the safety side, I have to say there is a very, very small niche in this area, and we may well be pioneering, to your point. Because of the resources we have, the yellow band, CPRD, I just see the opportunity here for that interconnectivity for the future. So super exciting, I think. But there is one area, so there's an opportunity there, and I'm happy to work with you, Alison, to see how this is such a great option to position ourselves as a leader. You know, we talk about world-class regulators, right? This is an area where not many players are in. And take people with us, other regulators with us, and that will also increase resource for us and knowledge. So I think it's a really good opportunity where a potential for collaboration where we can lead. The other piece is industry is also very interested in this. Again, a very small number of companies are working on this as early as in preclinical and phase 1. They are looking for safety, so this is all around risk-benefit, and personalized medicine, because this is where this will eventually lead to, is that whole area of maximizing the concept of personalized medicine. So I see a huge opportunity. I know we're doing this at the tail end, post-marketing, safety, but the huge potential here is that it's going to influence clinical research in that end-to-end system much further up. And it will be useful, again, I can share with you what I know outside this meeting. It'd be really important, I think, to also connect with the 2 or 3 companies who are working in this area very early on. So you're also learning from them, but very importantly, I think there will be huge interest to know what we're doing. So fantastic. I think this is what innovation in safety is about for the future, and really, really great potential for us, you know, just to improve public health as a whole, you know, across the spectrum, not just safety. Thank you.
So thank you. Maybe I could just come back. So thank you very much for those kind words. I know that we're really excited about it as an agency. I think that we absolutely agree that it's the whole product life cycle. We know that many trials, the reason most trials fail is for a safety issue. So how can we feed back any findings to inform that early drug development phase? We're also thinking about the end-to-end pathway. How can we support, how could this project support further point-of-care diagnostic tests, as we saw launched just last year for gentamicin and audiotoxicity in babies? How can we promote and support getting these findings into, you know, a point-of-care test which supports patients? Because personalised medicine, I would say this with my chief safety officer, but it's more than just efficacy. It's the risk side of that. So personalisation for risk is, to my mind, just as important as personalisation for efficacy. So very much that's the direction we want to travel in. And as we go through and develop what the next business model will look like, we'll going out and engaging more.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just make one more suggestion. I see an opportunity as you're talking about. We're talking about innovative clinical trials here and how we're approaching. I just wonder we should put a little placeholder there. Oh, sorry. Apologies. I just see another opportunity here in the context of clinical trials and innovation. I wonder if we should put a little placeholder now already on how you will connect some of this to your clinical trial discussions with the innovators that are going to come through the door. Because if you put the placeholder, the opportunities will come up and you're conscious of it by design. And I think, again, it'll be another big plus for the UK in terms of coming for clinical trials.
I think Junaid, then Mandy, and then me. And
So-
then Benji.
So another big fan, Alison. We've discussed this in the past, and I really would commend you on the focus that you've got around diversity around this project as well. So the question I had was around recruitment. And when we're thinking about recruitment, how are we thinking about engaging other organizations within primary care settings, secondary care settings? And are we also looking to work with Our Future Health or any other groups that are also doing trials at scale?
So at the moment, we have 3 main recruitment routes, which would be through our yellow card scheme, and we've already demonstrated that can work, and patients are very keen to engage with us. The second, as I've mentioned, is through CPRD, so identifying patients through the CPRD data set that we think have suffered this reaction, and then contacting the GP, and then the GP would contact them. Other routes are through patient organisations, through charities, So we can look to see what other routes we could look at. I'm very familiar with our Future Health as one route potentially. We've not yet engaged with those. There are other really key cohort studies ongoing within the UK. We're very strong in our cohort study in the UK, so we could look at where there might be further opportunities. I think that would all form part of the next model, really, for so what we're looking at is the future model of the biobank.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like we're going to need it'd be useful to have a bigger conversation not too far away when you're a bit more embedded. So June, Mandy.
I just quickly add to that. Last week, happened to be able to go to the NHS Genomics Board and see GEL's strategy. And I think if we really want to start not only improving recruitment, but getting ready for actually capturing the benefits of these data as they come through, this is a key consortium, NHS England, of course, but we need to think beyond that. And by the autumn, I think the next particular aspect that NHS Genomics Board will look at is pharmacogenomics. So I think we need to have these, if you like, hooks into other discussions to get this into practice as quick as we possibly can.
Last comment, then.
Yeah, and I would echo that, and this is a really good paper, Alison, so thank you to you and your team. This struck me as this has got to be more fundamental to what the agency is doing. Particularly, we've talked a lot about regulatory science. This is one of the cornerstones of regulatory science going forward, and it's something we can get funding for and develop because it's got that and bring in a broader piece. And I think this could have a big impact on public health, bigger than some of the things, which is very fancy technology, I'll put it in that way, which might have a small impact. So I would really encourage us to use this as a basis for our strategy on regulatory science so that we can command funding to take this to the next level.
Just to briefly come back, if I might, Chair, I mean, it very much fits with our vision of a more proactive pharmacovigilance approach. So rather than having to identify an adverse drug reaction after it's happened, is how can we prevent those? So I think there'll be various strands to that, using data, using AI, machine learning on some of our adverse reactions we've already got to identify where there may be commonalities, where there may be mechanisms that we could explore. This is another strand. We'll be looking at others as well to really start to shift the dial to that more proactive vigilance, because it's so important. We
and
know,
in clinical trial design.
Yes,
I
yeah,
think that's
and
where the key thing. This could change the way drugs come to market.
Exactly.
So I think a huge number of positive comments there. I don't want to bear down. I just want to make one small one. Yeah. So how many patients have been recruited?
So as I said, there's 5 currently, which sounds small, but it's the start of a journey.
And that's great. And I think getting to that point is fantastic. But I think just seeing the trajectory, you've got 150.
Yes.
How realistic is to do in 6 to 8, 10 months?
Oh, no, I would say very realistic.
Great. Well, that's really reassuring.
And
I think
we're starting the other routes now. So, and we're starting, obviously, the allopurinol and SGS pilot is also now just launched in terms of its recruitment. I think that as we launch the CPRD recruits, we'll see a wider pool of patients we'll be able to pour in, because we've been very strict with what we call the phenotype, the characterization of the reaction, so that we can ensure that we get the most defined patient population we can, which does restrict some of our pool. And one of the questions we'll be asking our scientific advice board is, how strict should we be on phenotypes going forward?
No, that's great. And I think if you can keep us sort of cited on progress on that would be fantastic. But it does feel like we should plan probably early summer to have a broader conversation, because there's so many threads to this that could be relevant. Thank you. Let's move on to innovative products. And Mark, I think I've been told acronyms are not allowed, so we should have to define ILAP and IDAP first, but over to you.
Thank you very much. So this paper is on the Innovative Devices Access Pathway, which we touched on earlier, and the Innovative Licensing Access Pathway for Medicines, ILAP. So the paper talks about the progress to date on basically both pathways. We touched on IDAP earlier. We are now well into the pilot phase where 8 representative innovative devices have been selected, and they're now underway working with partners, a series of meetings and advice meetings taking place to work out what the solution is in terms of best support for these devices and what a sustainable pathway will look like. On the innovative licensing and access pathway, when last raised at the board, it was within backlog. We have been working hard to actually deal with the backlog, and I'm very pleased to say that the innovation passport is now being delivered to the timeframes that we say. We're now engaged very much closely on the second part of it, the technology development profile, or TDP, where we're engaging closely with industry to pull out the value proposition on it, and also with the patients to understand how the patients can best add value, and to then bring those forward. Now, taking those together, we are hoping that as this advice is brought through, we're going to realise the vision of an integrated pathway, where we're basically looking ahead for combination devices of medicines and medical devices, and making sure that we have a pathway that supports that. We've also touched upon the importance of linking this across the ecosystem, the single agency journey, both with clinical trials, and we've also had discussions with Alison's team about how safety monitoring could be incorporated into it. So with that introduction, Chair, I'll pass back to yourself.
Thank you. Comments and questions?
Thank you, Mark. I think having had experience, particularly of working with companies using ILAP, I still think fundamentally we have a very good process here. I think we really need to think about how we execute it and how it's used and who our key customers are and where it fits with all of the other pathways. It is very confusing out there at the moment. In terms of that. So I think we need to really look at this. I mean, when this was first mooted, 2 or 3 years ago, I think the board said, well, why wouldn't you use this sort of pathway for everything we do, which is a new chemical entity? We don't seem to have gone along that path, but I don't think it's clear where this fits, what is truly innovative, and why we've got the multiplicity of different pathways. And I'm talking not for generics, but particularly for new license applications. And I think we have to get this communication really clear, and it has to also be how we collaborate. The advantage of this is, a similar way to what Alison was talking about, is having NICE, NIHR, HTA as part of that, because it's about getting devices and medicines to patients more quickly. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that in this. So I want to see where it fits and how our communication is and the impact it has on patients.
Thank you. I completely agree, Mandy. We have to get the greater clarity. Part of what's come is that we've seen the evolution of the ecosystem and also the evolution of the thinking behind ILAP and IDAP. So in that evolving, we're blurring. It is fundamentally to help innovative medicines where there isn't clear precedent, so that you're having to do sufficient thinking to bring them forward, or innovative devices. But that leads, of course, to the definition of what is an innovative medicine or device. And there, the partnership has been absolutely key, because we've been able to engage like never before with the HTA and the NHS to hit that consistency, not solely in terms of the safety assessment or the efficacy assessment we do, but what that might mean within the standard of care. And that's what we're hoping to bring forward with both pathways, is how that innovation appears throughout that life cycle to get it to the patient, from what we've said, from bed to bedside. The second part of this, which is quite novel, is that it involves or can involve preclinical information, supporting innovators who are working towards their first clinical trial. And that's been something that's been emphasised as a gap, which we're trying to develop on both of them. But you're absolutely right. communicating this clearly is going to be significant activity going forward, and we're probably not quite there yet on the devices, particularly because it's in the pilot stage, but also on the medicines because of the confusion of what is the value statement.
So perhaps can you clarify, because I think you've got a bullet point on revision to ILAP selection criteria, but has that, I think that partly would address what Mandy's saying, but I'm not quite clear where that's landed. So is that been revised and agreed, or is that in process?
That's in process of being revised. So we're working with the partners to make sure that that is absolutely nailed down. And when we effectively relaunch ILAP, those criteria will be very clearly communicated.
Okay, and I guess maybe some of the board would value vision of that.
Yes.
Paul?
Yeah, if I can just sort of pick up on Mandy's comments with a bit more granularity. I mean, firstly, on the channeling, does that happen actively? So if somebody goes into ILAP or IDAP and is rejected, do you automatically move them into a different stream just because people will not know whether they truly fit with the criteria or not?
In terms of the ones that regrettably get rejected, they receive a detailed letter of what has happened and why that decision has been reached. And we also offer particularly a follow-up meeting. So in some cases, they've come a bit early, and in some cases, they've not perhaps thought through the case. So that we hope through that advice to be absolutely give them some value back, even though that they're not progressing through. But there's not a single case-by-case channel. It depends on the reason for the pushback as to what they have to do next.
Yeah, because the more proactively we can work with applicants and the better service that we're offering. And then the second question was just around how the whole collaboration works and whether, because there are a lot of different stakeholders involved, do they all turn up? Do any of them block progress? And how do you manage the situation where something may be very innovative in one area but not in another? And I'm actually thinking one of the examples you gave earlier with the dementia markers, which are really coming on stream. And the big innovation and challenge there is going to be the real clinical readout is going to be 10, 20, 30 years down the line. So there's going to be a lot of conditionality that needs to be thought about, both in terms of from a sort of traditional MHRA perspective, but also on the health economics from a NICE perspective, that there's a lot of innovation needed.
Absolutely agreed. So to address your first question, yes, they all turn up. We have got regular. Now, what are they turning up to? We basically perform an assessment on the medicines and distribute that to the partners for discussion. And the discussion will then go on quite some time to try and draw it out. Then we meet for what we call the steering group, which is where we hit a consensus on whether it's going to proceed forward. And that process will include the patient as well, so we've got the patient view. I've not come across particular block. It's more a case of where there are concerns, where there are gaps. And that comes back to the nature of the advice given, which is, well, this is what we don't know, rather than stopping it. In terms of the longer term, yes, that is precisely one of the great challenges, which is, well, what is the longer term payoff? And this is what our partners are dealing with. We ourselves are using increasingly CHM and other expert bodies to try and make sure that where we don't have the immediate answers, we can build that consensus. But you've highlighted the challenge here. Some of these things are really novel, and we can't absolutely predict.
Glenn, do you want to make any comment about the sort of partnership ecosystem and how this?
Just that, as what Mark's saying, is very positive that we are in a good collaborative place with our partners, both on IDAP and ILAP. Actually, everyone wants to wade in. I think the importance of the partnership is to add to Mark's comments to Paul's question. You're talking about long-term need for innovation across the system, and some of those things we can control, our own assessment criteria, etc. Some we can't. But it's the really positive aspect of having the NHS and HRA and UK-wide partners around a table on a regular basis, because those questions can be thrown at them. So what are we going to do? What are you going to do to enable this innovation? So I think, yes, it's really positive. It's good to see the system working as a system. And I think that also long-term view will help address those continuous challenges you're going to get in any area of innovation. Things will change, to put it bluntly. And we need the system to be able to adapt alongside us to deliver that. So it's all positive, I think.
Okay, Raj, and then unless did you want to come back?
No, I mean, that's great. And if we can use those sort of case stories to communicate from a business development perspective.
Raj, and then June.
It was very much on the same line, because some of this seems to be like deja vu, keeps coming back to the board a number of times. And I just wonder if this is a good time for us to say, okay, let's do a little bit of a deep dive around the future plan, having heard what we have heard around transparency, more proactive engagement. You know, we've come to a good place from hearing from Glenn. I think now is the time to take stock and say, how can we do this even better, and start addressing some of these in the longer term. Be good to have at a later point in the summer to have a real deep dive discussion on this with very clear areas of where we want to focus.
Okay, it's clear, Steph. Thank you. June?
Well, that's absolutely right. Now is the time. A lot of thinking and reflection's been done. We need 3 months to have reset the scope, revised the governance with clear roles and responsibilities, and really focused on the output. The industry has to have something that's valuable. We've called it a target development profile. We know the industry does this. What value is being added by bringing together the regulator, the HTA, and the NHS? So I totally respect what you're saying. We need to have it so that we can deliver by July. So I would have said June at the very latest. We need that deep dive, possibly even as soon as next month if the team is ready. We do have a very good and well thought through model for IDAP. And I think if we're thinking about the ultimate alignment, integration from next year, we've actually got a series of timelines, milestones to meet. July for the relaunch, to meet industry expectations and needs for the value that the deliverable is adding, and actually the alignment with medtech and diagnostics by the beginning of next year. So thank you. The time is now to do this.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it does. I mean, we haven't got much time now, so we can't really do it justice, but we should come back to it, as we say, relatively soon. Thank you. Let's move on. We've got 2 more items that we still need to do before questions. So next is an update on PSEC, Mercy.
And I'll try and be brief. PSEC met on the 15th of February. We had fewer topics than initially scheduled, as more work had to be done in some areas, so it's more appropriate to reschedule. So the committee has enough information really to take a deep dive on some areas. But the areas we did look at was what our approaches to patient engagement around isotretinoin. And in particular, we wanted to kind of know what lessons could be learned for other areas. I think the key things was really about more timely feedback to people that kind of contribute to patient engagement. But also looking this was quite an intensive piece of work that took quite a lot of resources. So we kind of are aware that it would be hard to replicate. So we need to kind of think through, how we can do it kind of more efficiently and effectively. So the committee discussed that. And the other area we looked at is the new medical device regulations, which really are a step on the way to delivering the independent medicines and medical devices review, so that people have, if there are kind of those kind of concerns that occurred with mesh and things are reduced. And we particularly looked at the new duties on manufacturers, as well as things like the implant card, which is given to patients to identify things like the batch number of the device they have and other information. So really exciting things, and I was particularly pleased to see that we're moving towards some of the recommendations from the independent review, such as the unique device identifier as well. We're kind of moving towards that. So it was a really, I think, productive discussion that we had about what the new medical device regulations could deliver. The only final thing I would say that I had a discussion with Henrietta Hughes, the patient commissioner, which was really productive. And the outcome of that is that we spoke a lot more about kind of the systems approach to this. The MHRA is only one part of the system. I was very pleased to note that Alison, our Chief Safety Officer, regularly speaks with other parts of the system about safety, and that was a kind of really important thing. Just to note that the Patient Safety Commissioner and I, as chair of PSEC, decided we should speak more regularly as well, so every couple of months.
Great, thanks, Mercy. Any comments?
Yes, I suppose I could follow up a little bit on the isotretinoin example. This was a very substantial review, and we did do quite extensive engagement with a public consultation, which had nearly 660, I think 659 responses across the healthcare ecosystem. But you're absolutely right, it took a long time, and that can be frustrating for those participants who did contribute to that. So, and part of that reason, and I think it picks up a little bit on what Mark was saying about engagement with the NHS and the healthcare ecosystem, implementation science of risk minimization measures and introducing new products into a healthcare system is becoming more and more important. And as we had an implementation group for isotretinoin, some of those complexities really rose to the surface with quite a changed prescribing environment from the previous look at isotretinoin. So understanding how risk minimization measures will land in quite a complex prescribing environment took some time, and that could be frustrating for those participants who had contributed and were waiting for the results. So more feedback and more engagement with people once they have contributed was a big take-home message, but also the complexities of implementing safety measures in the healthcare system is also becoming clearer and clearer.
Thank you. Well, I thought it was a question from the back. No, any other questions? Great. No, well, thank you, Mercy. Is there anything you want to highlight about the sort of future plan of work that would be useful to know?
Well, as the committee know, we're always planning future plans. So we've got probably we projected for the next 3 or 4 meetings what's coming up. But as we found with this meeting, it kind of depends on where things are in progressing, because it's we don't really want to take things to the committee when they're too early in the process, because we need enough information really to have a good discussion. So we're certainly commissioning papers for the next one in May, and hopefully that will be a packed agenda.
Well, depends who you are. Okay, thank you. That's great. Good. And so I think the last substantive item we've got is from Liz with the 2023 People Survey. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And before I get into it, just to say, I've got the figure for how many new starters we've had in our organisation this financial year, and it's 321, which is a significant number of people. And we've also 111 people in the pipeline. So I think it gives a sense of the scale of change that we're dealing with. But onto the People Survey, and this always brings out the inner geek in me, I'm afraid. But it's our annual chance to look at in a formal way morale and culture. And this year we can celebrate a greatly improved set of results, which I attribute to our incredibly hard-working line managers, particularly. But before we get the balloons and hats out, I think we've come from a very low base, and it's there's still a great deal to do in terms of our engagement score. Engagement in the civil service survey is one of the keys. It tracks pride, inspiration, attachment, motivation, and critically for me, whether people would recommend the MHRA as a great place to work. And our score is 58% at the moment, which is a long way from where we want to be. The range, the 103 organisations that take part, the range is from 53 to 77, so to give you a feel of where we are. And the median organisation is at 64. An issue for us, I think, that we must address in the coming period is that about a third of our colleagues neither agree nor disagree when they answer the question, these key questions. And so we've got a lot more to do, I think, to actively engage colleagues in our work and actively engage them in in the survey. Colleagues often ask me, what does good look like in engagement score? I've got to say, very small organisations always do best. So I bet my mortgage on the fact that the organisations in the late 70s are smaller organisations. The big beasts of the public service, the 5 really large departments with tens of thousands of people, obviously struggle. But for an organisation of our size, the small to medium, the 1 to 5,000 group, we should be looking for a score around 65 or more. So that's where we should be. And our plan is to get there within the next 2 years. There's a lot of data produced as a result of the People Survey. It's cut by group and by team. And as you'd expect, there's really quite considerable variation. This year, we've decided to adopt a corporate action plan and give our line managers the option to adopt a local plan. That's because we don't want to make a cottage industry of it. If the corporate objectives cover what needs to be done, that's great. But if they don't, we expect our managers to be developing plans to deal with their local results too. In coming to the plan, we work with our one agency leadership group to develop the proposals, looking at the data obviously, but also looking at what we as a regulator need to be and what we need to do. So we've selected some 3 objectives that we think are most likely to be able to be changed in the period up to October 24, when the next survey will come out. And are most likely to support effective regulation. And I'll just touch on the 3, if I may, Chair. First is supporting people to raise concerns and to protect their well-being. And this is one of the kind of regulatory highlights for me. It's about having the trust and confidence to speak up, to challenge decisions, to call out bullying behaviour, of course, and the feeling that the organisation cares for everyone's well-being. It's that sense of psychological safety in the organisation. And I think as a regulator, I think we'd all agree that we need people who are willing and able to speak up, and that's one of the skills of working for an organisation like this, and one of the levels of confidence we want to put in place. We are still dissatisfied with response to the question. In my organisation, people are encouraged to speak up when they identify a serious policy or delivery risk. We want to improve that. We're off the civil service median even, and we want to be a leader in that. Clearly, in terms of bullying, the only number that's acceptable for bullying is 0. And in general, colleagues are telling us that they're not feeling as well supported in terms of their well-being as we would like, and we're comparing ourselves to the civil service median and seeing a bit of a drift. So we want to give colleagues some additional avenues to express their concerns. We want them to be able to seek help more easily. So, for example, the introduction of short duration self-referred counselling, independently facilitated well-being workshops, the relaunch of our current wellbeing offer, and further communication to support freedom to speak out are all objectives that we are pursuing. In the second of those interlinked objectives, again relates to our core work as a regulator. We've called it increase productivity and provide support to manage workloads, and we've already talked quite a bit about productivity and understanding workloads in this meeting. We've got a history, I'm afraid, of quite poorly related workload management. This year, about half our staff felt they had an acceptable workload, and I suppose the other half didn't. And that's a long trend. So even looking back to 2020, that was more or less the case. We've made some decisions to change teams and to change how teams operate during transformation. And we have to make sure that those decisions were right and good. We know that productivity is not just about how hard people work. And as Julian was demonstrating, it's all about the processes, the tools, the leadership that enables their outputs. And we've got some excellent tools on the on the blocks coming to help, Regulatory Connect, further releases of Safety Connect, but we're also challenging every manager in our organisation to review every process. We began this work at our leadership event with a short productivity workforce. We're encouraging managers to develop those productivity measures, and we're wanting to establish very clearly that our concern is as much about excessive workloads as it is about workloads that are not hitting the spot. So we need to understand what good productivity looks like so that we can track excessive productivity as well as poor productivity. But both those things are equally important, and my suspicion is that we've got more worry in the excessive box at the moment than in the underperforming box, but the data will tell us that. So we need to embed the discipline of talking about productivity. We need to do more re-engineering of our processes, and that will be a prerequisite in any requests for additional resources as we go forward. In the third area, building trust and confidence in the transparency of leadership decision making. I think it's fair to say that our 2022 transformation programme has left a legacy. Trust and confidence in leadership was compromised, and I'm afraid to say I don't find that unusual. It's not a surprise to me. Colleagues tell us that their leaders are insufficiently visible, and people don't feel so well as informed about matters that affect them, and that's despite, frankly, a huge amount of information being published daily on our intranet. So we know that we've got more to do to restore trust and confidence, and that requires some consistent and personal communication, feedback, openness, the compassionate leadership we talked about earlier. And we're doing this by more questions and answers at events and at all staff meetings, more informality of communication, I suppose, a possible podcast idea which Rose, Rachel and I have been trialling and testing. So the work is underway to improve our engagement with our colleagues, particularly through our 6 weekly all-staff meetings. A slight note of caution I would add to that is that where we have done very quick and informal briefings, as we did on the issue that we had at this building, we found that those briefings found their way onto civil service world very quickly, and so we are obviously wanting to make sure that our colleagues understand that those informal briefings really belong for internal consumption only. So finally, from me, when you prioritise, you in effect deprioritise, and that's sadly true. Areas that I know we will want to work on in the future, and so are doing some work in the background, are improving career paths for colleagues, improving access to learning, and will particularly be aided by the adoption of a learning management system, and which we hope to achieve during this year. Pay, which is across the civil service an issue for us. We are beginning to develop new pay system discussions so that we can look at where we can help with that. Access to tools, as I said, we've got some great tools coming on, so we'll wait and see how they land. But these are likely to be some of the priorities in future years. I'm really aware that there's lots and lots of stuff in here and lots of stuff in the survey, but happy to take any questions I can.
That's
answer.
great, thank you. And as you say, there's a lot there, but it's very clear, and thank you for communicating it. So comments or questions? Yes, I'll start with Mercy. And then.
I just want to raise that I'm the Raising Concerns champion, and I've done quite a lot of internal campaigns in the past, but I think it's probably due another one, really, considering all the new staff that we have. So, of course, I'm particularly concerned that people don't feel confident to speak up. So it's important for them to know that I exist outside the executive and line management parts of it. But obviously it's also linked to the bullying and harassment kind of stuff as well. So I will be available to do that, but I also really want to see how we're going to tackle this confidence that people have in the organisation, because that's really important. The other thing I just want to link with that, Liz, is about confidence and transparency of leadership, and I would include the NEDs amongst those. I realised quite recently I stepped in to do a conference for the pharmacovigilance conference, but the most important part of that was also engaging with staff and for them to know kind of who I was and what the board did as well. So I would encourage the organisation to also use the NEDs as well, so that we can, you know, kind of really be there for people and for them to understand that we don't just drift in on a kind of a monthly basis, but we are there kind of in the background all the time and a resource to be used.
Thanks, Mercy. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I was aware that you're raising concerns, Champion, and wanted to talk to you about that because I do think it acts as an important backstop. And having worked in the NHS, I could not do without someone in that position. I agree also that it's about everyone's transparency in leadership and building that trust. And I reflect on the non-executives who were able to come to one of our leadership events just before Christmas, and what wonderful feedback you all got from being there. So I do ask and hope that that's something that where colleagues they can contribute. Our staff work incredibly hard, and it's absolutely magnificent when they're thanked by people who are taking that helicopter view. So thank you.
Yeah, I notice you don't survey the view of the board's leadership, so I don't know if you want to. It might be turkeys voting for Christmas, but I think the NEDs as a whole would be very keen to lean in more where helpful. Did you want to come in, Jean? Sorry, I thought you...
No, just...
Paul. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
Thank you. Did the third of staff who felt they weren't maximally productive, what sort of things were they saying would make them more productive? And was anything surprising that we didn't already know?
It's hard to say because the narrative comments don't necessarily relate particularly to that question. So we're looking at if the issue of tools, it does come up in the narrative comment that people haven't got the tools. Many of those tools, of course, are imminent, but the systems issues. We are doing a further bit of work talking to people about their well-being concerns to understand whether well-being has any impact on people's productivity. We can't see any links at the moment. But I'm afraid I can't give you anything that really connects to that. I've just been looking at the trends over time.
Thanks. Claire.
2 questions from me, please. The one around excessive workloads, and I know you just said then you have suspicions. That I would say it's a fact because ever since I joined and continuously since, this always comes up in the staff survey responses, and I think it also relates to the level of engagement, because I've had comments when I've asked for feedback and so on around it's pointless engaging in staff survey responses and so on because they keep giving the same information but nothing's ever done about it, is the perception. So I think it's around specifics. So if an excessive workload is identified by everyone and we agree that, then what tangibles can we bring into place? And then my other quick question is, the 3 themes, are they time boxed, and how will we measure success? So will it be from the next survey, which is quite a while to wait, or is there something a bit more proactive and short term that we can look at and help you with that as well, Liz? I'm asking you the question, but we're all responsible as well.
We have a plan to do a little mini pulse survey partway through, but I'm afraid the next staff survey, which is October, will roll around surprisingly quickly. So I do think that is the point where we really measure change. You're quite right that the perception that that people have excessive workloads hasn't really changed a great deal. The 2020 staff survey, which was the high watermark for staff survey, which obviously we're keen to get back to, also shows about 50% of people thought that or only 50% of the people thought they had a manageable workload. So it's an ongoing problem. How do you deal with it as a manager? Well, in my workshop, I was very honest with people. You have to descope jobs. You have to take things away from people. You have to seek more resources. But these things can only happen when you have looked at every process and understood that your processes are as efficient as they can be, and had the productivity discussions with everyone. But I'm afraid there's no magic bullet other than descoping jobs so that people have got less work to do, and adding resources where that's affordable. There's a difficulty there, and I get that, but we've got to actively engage in it. I don't think we've got any option but to, with a long-term trend that people feel that their workload is higher than comparable organisations, and I think that's the key.
Carly?
I just wanted to come in briefly on 2 points. The first, in relation to the point about speaking up and your role, Mercy, as champion, and the awareness campaigns we've had around that. The detailed responses for that kind of speaking up have grown back to their previous positive levels. So I think in terms of that ability to raise a concern under the Civil Service Code, we've got evidence that we're in a good place here. However, that is only one small part of the wider picture of speaking up. So I think working together to support that increased confidence is absolutely critical. The only other thing that strikes me, and Liz, you gave that very helpful presentation on productivity at the recent Line Managers Conference. I think there is an opportunity to bring that together with the quality work and look for some solutions to some of those workforce loading issues through that lens of quality. So very keen to support via that means.
I hadn't actually thought of that, so that's really helpful to put those two things together. Thank you.
Can I ask, I think if I understood correctly, you were saying that within the survey there's flexibility for areas to tailor the survey for their own needs. So how many areas have taken that up?
In terms of the action planning, so we have a corporate action plan which I've described, and then teams have cuts of their survey, the HR team, for example, and teams will look at their cut and ask, are the corporate initiatives enough? Some will decide they are, and some will decide they're not. I don't have data about the balance yet, as it's fairly new off the block.
Yeah. Any last comment? Otherwise, if not, thank you for that, and that's very helpful. So I think that leaves us with questions. So Rachel, I'll turn to you in a moment, but I think we've got perhaps one submitted question related to the agenda. Is that right?
Yes, we've got one pre-submitted question, which I thought I'd start with, and then a number that have been submitted through the chat as we've gone through the meeting. So if I start us off, it is one about the innovative licensing and access pathway that Mark had a paper on. And it's a two-part question. First of all, are there any examples of how ILAP has benefited companies, as there's no data available to understand how it's been used in practice? And the questioner says it's difficult to convince their internal stakeholders within their company on the benefits that ILAP's brought. And then the second part of the question relates to the future, and it is how different will the new version of ILAP be, and what changes can industry expect?
And is that questioner online if they want to come back in?
I believe they are, but they didn't wish to ask the question in person.
Mark, I think that's probably for you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the question. So since ILAP was launched in January 2021, it's had 155 innovation passports, of which of which 24 have gone to market authorization, which means those products are now in use. And through that, about 17 were with Project Orbis, which is a collaboration with the FDA to support innovative cancer therapies. Now, with those figures said, due to commercial sensitivity, the MHRA does not publish details of the companies or products that have received innovation passports. However, we fully understand that industry are very keen to understand the value of ILAP and will for IDAP for the reasons that the question has said. So we are working through case studies that we will be putting into the public domain as part of the launch of ILAP. It's worth saying as well that there is a lot of information in the public domain on ILAP and the experience, and particularly some of the companies that have been through have written their own case studies. So there is information that is available out there. Looking to the second part of the question about the relaunch of ILAP, we are working very closely with the partners to revise the eligibility criteria to get to the heart of what comes on, the particular advice offering at different parts of the pathway, the alignment with existing regulatory support so that we've got greater clarity, improved involvement of patients, and improved working with partners to make sure that's as seamless as possible. We'll also be taking in line recommendations from what was known as the Vallance-McLean Review on pro-innovation regulation of technologies. And all of this will be expected to go live in late summer, as we said earlier, and with those details will come out close to the time. So yes, we will make sure that we have a much clearer ILAP going forward. Thank you.
Okay, and I guess there can't be a response, but I guess we hear the message, which is that it's hard to make that case internally, and we need to be able to
Exactly. That is, it's vital that that's properly addressed.
Okay.
Okay, if we move on to the next one. So this relates to the paper on finance and HR performance. And the question says that there have been increases in NHS sickness absence, and data for the country is showing increases in those with long-term disabilities. Do you believe the MHRA long-term sickness has occurred since 2021?
I guess, Liz, that's, yeah.
I do not believe that. I've had a look at the current sickness data, but I haven't compared it to the 2020 data. I will happily do that. The number of long-term sickness cases is typical of the sort of organisation we are, and so I haven't got any significant concerns about it. But I'll deep dive the data and produce it for sure to verify that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next one goes back to the paper on established medicines, and the questioner is asking for a simple outline of what established medicines are. They're saying they assume they're medicines off licence which are repurposed for new uses, but is that correct?
So established medicines, so those are typically the two types. Type 1 is a generic medicine, which is a reformulated version of the originator product, which is off patent, and that uses a reference product which is already on the market in the UK. And the other type is a similarly known active, but in a new formulation or a new design of a way to get that molecule to a patient. And so that's the term that we use for established medicines, those two types.
So it's not just about patents. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another one which I think is for Liz. And Liz, you mentioned reward and recognition vouchers, and there were a couple of questions which, summarised, are what are the reward vouchers, how much is a voucher for, and what are they awarded for? So a little bit more on that would be helpful.
Certainly. I like to think of the reward vouchers as the virtual bunch of flowers. So the amounts are £50 and £100. There are tax implications to that, which our colleagues in finance have happily dealt with for us. They're classically given quite quickly after some wonderful piece of work has happened. So managers and colleagues are able to nominate people. There is, of course, a moderation of that to make sure that the work hasn't been rewarded in more than once. But the key thing about these vouchers is not the value of the voucher, it's the value of the recognition. So I like to think of them as virtual flowers or a virtual box of chocolates, relatively modest sums, but with a relatively large impact.
I don't know what chocolates you buy. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So 2 more questions. One following up the clinical trials discussion. The questioner is asking, what are the expanded criteria for clinical trials that are eligible for notification?
Thank you very much. So for clinical trials, the notification scheme has been revised on the back that we are doing risk proportionate assessment of clinical trials. So we're looking at the safety risk within the trials. Now, for something like a first-in-human trial, there is a very high level of safety risk because we don't know what we're doing. So those trials are not considered for notification. But as you proceed through the phases, and that is a well-recognized classification system from phase 1 to phase 4, you begin to actually have a handle on the safety issues and can start working on the efficacy of the molecule. So typically the notification scheme is brought in for phase 3 and phase 4 trials where there is a high level of existing safety and we understand the risks that are going to be involved. However, we are also very careful to make sure that we do understand it. So notification is not automatic for phase 3, phase 4. It depends what the trial is. If something called the investigative medical product is being used in an entirely new way for the phase 3 trial, then we would consider that a more high risk. I've urged the questioner to actually look at the website. We have put a significant amount of detail on the notification scheme out there, and we're hopeful that will support and also highlight the fact that we are also continuing to revise the notification scheme to make it more applicable, and those revisions will be posted on the website as they move forward.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And then just one final question, which came in during the People Survey paper. So the chair mentioned that the boards had a leadership role in terms of staff engagement. And would the board be interested in a formal feedback structure that takes in the views of external stakeholders?
Do you want to comment on behalf of the organisation? I mean, I think on behalf of the board, I think we'd be interested to understand how to get feedback in structured ways.
My personal view, and I can only speak personally, is yes, because as an organisation we are dedicated to improving 360-degree feedback about individuals, and thus we would also be interested in that about ourselves as an organisation. But this is not something that I'm afraid I've discussed with my colleagues.
No, I understand. Yeah, but I think that, there would be support. Okay.
Yeah, that concludes the questions today.
Great, thank you for that. And so thank you to everybody who's attended and watched the board meeting today. And thank you in particular to our staff who've contributed to the production of the papers and the organisation of the meeting. And finally, before we leave, just to remind everybody that the purpose of the MHRA is to protect and improve public health, and we continue to do that through enabling scientific innovation, accelerating patient access to new products, and strengthening our patient safety and surveillance systems. So with that in mind, I'll close the meeting and thank you for your time.